In country music, we love to talk about legends, the icons whose names will never leave the neon lights of Nashville. But there is another side to this story. For every superstar who stayed on top, there are artists who once ruled the charts, filled arenas, and lived in the spotlight, only to slowly, quietly fade away. This is not a list of failures. These are 20 country artists who made it. They climbed the charts, earned gold records, moved people to tears, and gave us songs we still hum without thinking. And yet, at some point, the radios stopped playing them, the labels stopped calling, and the world simply moved on. Some walked away on their own terms. Others were pushed out by changing trends, cruel timing, or personal crises. In each story, there's a moment where everything shifts. A hit single, a closed record label, a family tragedy, or a conscious decision to choose real life over fame. Let's rewind the tape and look at the 20 country artists who faded into obscurity and what really happened after the spotlight dimmed. Number 20, Deana Carter, from Strawberry Wine to a quieter stage. Deana Carter never crept into country music. She arrived like a storm that everyone instantly recognized. Born into a musical family, she stepped into the industry with confidence, but no one could predict just how big her first impact would be. Her debut single, Strawberry Wine, wasn't just a hit, it became an anthem. It shot straight to #1 and carved out a place in country history that still feels untouchable decades later. The song's nostalgic, bittersweet feel turned it into a modern classic. It remains a staple on country radio and a go-to choice at karaoke bars in Nashville and beyond. For many fans, Strawberry Wine is one of those songs that defines an era, a track that instantly pulls you back to a particular summer, a first love, a moment you thought would last forever. Carter didn't stop there. At the height of her success, she followed up with more hits like We Danced Anyway and How Do I Get There, proving she wasn't just a one-song wonder. Those singles helped cement her as one of the most compelling voices of her time, and for a while, it looked like she was on a long, unstoppable climb. Unlike some artists on this list, Deana never truly disappeared. Her chart presence faded, but her creative drive didn't. In 2013, she released the album Southern Way of Life, a reminder that she still had stories to tell. In 2017, she celebrated the 20th anniversary of her breakthrough record, Did I Shave My Legs for This?, leaning into the nostalgia that fans still felt for that album. As the industry shifted and traditional radio airplay became harder to hold onto, Deana reinvented how she connected with her audience. Instead of chasing trends, she turned to online platforms. She launched 2 video podcasts, Wing It Wednesday and TGIF ISOS, the latter reflecting her faith and spiritual life, hosted directly on her YouTube channel. Today, you might not hear Deana Carter every hour on mainstream radio, but she hasn't vanished. She has simply moved to a different kind of stage, one where she speaks directly to her fans, on her terms, at her own pace. Her presence is quieter now, but for those who still press play, she never truly left. Number 19, Carolyn Dawn Johnson, the songwriter who stepped out of the spotlight. Before most country fans ever saw her face, they heard her words. Carolyn Dawn Johnson first made her mark behind the scenes as a songwriter with a gift for emotional detail. One of her earliest big breaks came with Single White Female, a hit for Chelly Wright that announced Johnson's talent to the Nashville machine and opened doors that had been closed before. That success earned her a record deal in 2000 and set the stage for her own moment in the spotlight. In 2001, she released her debut album, and with it came 2 standout singles, Complicated and I Don't Want You to Go. Both songs climbed the charts and helped her carve out a place as a promising solo artist, not just a writer working in the background. For a while, it looked like Carolyn Dawn Johnson was on the path to sustained mainstream success. But after that early burst of visibility, she quietly stepped back from the front of the stage. To outsiders, it might have seemed like she disappeared. Yet the truth is more complicated. She never fully left the industry. She simply shifted roles. Johnson continued to write, collaborate, and support other artists, becoming one of those essential, less visible figures who help shape the sound of modern country. Over the years, she played different parts, touring, backing up fellow musicians, and even joining Miranda Lambert's band for a period. It was a reminder that being an artist doesn't always mean being the name on the marquee. Sometimes it means being the trusted presence on stage with someone else, making the whole show stronger. Her last studio album, Love Rules, was released in 2010. Since then, new music has been rare, but her influence lingers in the work she's done for others. Carolyn Dawn Johnson's chart run may have been brief, but that doesn't mean her story ended. It just moved off the front cover and into the liner notes, the place where the true craftsmen of country music quietly live. Number 18, Cindy Thompson, the rising star. Who chose a different life? For Cindy Thompson, the dream began young. As a 12 or 13-year-old, she imagined herself on stage, singing country songs to packed crowds. Unlike many childhood fantasies, this one never faded. It followed her into her teens and beyond until she decided to bet everything on it. After just 1 year of college, she did what so many country hopefuls talk about but never actually do. She dropped out, packed up, and moved to Nashville. Her parents supported her, but there was nothing glamorous about those early days. She babysat, cleaned houses, and took whatever work she could find while waiting for the break that might never come. Then, everything changed. Thompson met a producer who believed in her and helped her land a publishing deal. In Nashville, it usually takes years, often 5 or more, to move from just another hopeful to a signed artist. Cindy did it in 2. She secured a record deal with Capitol Records, released an album, and watched as her single, What I Really Meant to Say, climbed the charts and became a hit. She toured with Jody Messina and Alan Jackson, 2 major names in country music, and shared stages with Trisha Yearwood and Martina McBride. From the outside, it looked perfect. A young artist living the dream, surrounded by stars, basking in the success so many never find. Her debut single, released in 2000, connected strongly with listeners, and 2 more tracks from the same album also charted well. But behind the schedule, the travel, and the pressure, Cindy was confronting a quieter truth. The life she had built with her husband, Daniel Goodman, in Franklin, Tennessee, didn't fit with endless touring. The grind of the road wasn't what she truly wanted, and she realized that staying at the top would mean sacrificing more than she was willing to give. Instead of chasing another hit at all costs, she made a decision that stunned the industry. She chose not to release a second album, even after a successful debut. A comeback attempt in 2006 didn't reignite her career, and by the time she put out a short EP in 2009, the industry had largely moved on to the next wave of voices. Today, Cindy Thompson lives far from the constant noise of the spotlight. Her story isn't one of failure, but of someone who proved she could win the game, and then walked away, choosing a quieter, more personal kind of happiness over constant exposure. Number 17, Tucker, a sister's voice, lost to time. In the 1970s and early 1980s, LaCosta Tucker's name echoed through country music circles as a warm, heartfelt presence. She wasn't just someone's sister, though she did share a deep bond with one of the genre's most famous voices, Tanya Tucker. Long before either of them had record deals, the Tucker sisters were already on stage, performing together in their family band, the Country Westerners. Those early days forged not only their harmonies, but also a shared love of music that would shape both their lives. After finishing college, LaCosta moved to Las Vegas to be near Tanya, positioning herself closer to opportunity. In 1974, she signed with Capitol Records and began her own professional journey in country music. Through the late 1970s and into the early 1980s, her songs found an audience, and she earned steady attention. Her final significant hit, Love Take It Easy on Me, arrived in 1982, marking the end of her strongest commercial run. As her solo momentum slowed, LaCosta didn't immediately disappear. Instead, she joined Tanya on tour for a time, bringing their partnership full circle. On stage together again, they shared the spotlight, their voices intertwined just as they had been in their childhood band. Fans who saw those shows remember them as special moments, a glimpse of a family story playing out in real time under bright lights. But once that period ended, LaCosta made a choice that many artists on this list eventually arrive at. She quietly walked away. There was no dramatic comeback attempt, no late career reinvention, no chasing of trends. She simply stepped out of the public eye. leaving behind a modest but meaningful musical legacy, and choosing a life lived far from the scrutiny and demands of fame. Today, LaCosta Tucker is one of those names that sparks recognition in a certain generation of fans, especially those who followed the Tucker family story closely. For everyone else, she has become a nearly forgotten figure, a reminder that sometimes even real talent and genuine success don't guarantee a long stay in the spotlight. Number 16, walking away rather than compromising. Chris Cagle's run in country music was anything but insignificant. For a time, he was a familiar name on the charts, known for songs that blended energy, heart, and a traditional edge. Tracks like What a Beautiful Day, What Kind of Gone, and I Breathe In, I Breathe Out resonated with listeners who craved emotional storytelling wrapped in radio-friendly melodies. His debut album, Play It Loud, didn't just do well. It went gold in the United States, a clear sign of both commercial success and fan loyalty. His self-titled second album also reached gold status, proving that the first record was no fluke. Over the years, he released 3 more albums, and multiple singles broke into the top 20, showcasing a work ethic that kept him present in the country landscape longer than many of his peers. In 2010, Cagle changed record labels and released Back in the Saddle, a title that seemed to signal a fresh chapter. But the industry around him was shifting. Country music was leaning harder into pop influences, and the sound dominating the charts was drifting away from the lane where Cagle felt most at home. 3 years later, his label shut down, leaving him without a stable platform for his music. By October 2015, he posted a brief but significant announcement on Facebook. He was stepping away from music. There was no scandal, no public meltdown, no dramatic fall. Instead, it was a quiet, deliberate choice. He wanted more time with his family, and he refused to reshape his sound to fit the increasingly pop-driven direction of mainstream country. For him, compromising his musical identity wasn't an option. Walking away was. Yet even retirement in country music is rarely absolute. Despite his announcement, he didn't vanish entirely. Tour dates and appearances continued to pop up, and as of 2022, his website showed that he was still performing in cities across the United States. He may no longer be chasing chart success or heavy radio rotation, but he hasn't completely abandoned the stage. Chris Cagle's story is one of boundaries. Knowing what you believe country music should sound like, refusing to dilute that belief just to cling to the charts, and accepting a smaller spotlight in exchange for a life feels more honest. Number 15, a breakout star who faced a changing landscape. Chely Wright's rise in country music felt like a long-earned victory. After years of working her way through the Nashville scene, she finally delivered a major hit with Single White Female. The song didn't just chart, it catapulted her into the national spotlight and became the defining track of her career. Fans embraced her authenticity, her sincerity, and the emotional clarity in her voice. But as powerful as that breakthrough was, the industry soon shifted around her. The late 1990s and early 2000s saw new trends emerging in country music, and radio programmers increasingly focused on younger, more pop-oriented acts. Chely Wright, despite her talent, found herself pushed to the edges of mainstream playlists. While she continued recording, releasing singles, and staying connected with her audience, she couldn't maintain the chart dominance of her peak years. In 2004, she released a greatest hits album, a milestone that usually signals a celebrated career. Yet it also marked a turning point, a moment when the industry seemed to lose focus on her, even as loyal fans stayed by her side. Still, she kept moving forward. In 2010, she released Lifted Off the Ground, an album filled with introspective songwriting that showed her growth both musically and personally. The project was critically appreciated, even if it didn't bring her back to the top of the charts. Despite fewer radio hits, Wright built a meaningful presence through advocacy, writing, and community work. She remained visible to those who cared, continuing to create music and tell her story. Today, Chely Wright may no longer dominate the airwaves, but she has crafted a life and career defined by purpose rather than chart positions. For many fans, she remains a powerful voice, one that never fully faded, even as the spotlight shifted elsewhere. Number 14. The artist who stepped back on her own terms. Kelly Willis is one of those artists whose voice feels timeless, rich, expressive, and deeply rooted in traditional country. Her early career generated significant excitement, and in 1993 she released the album Kelly Willis, a record that many believed could push her further into mainstream recognition. But music careers rarely follow the straight lines we imagine, and soon after that release, Willis found herself stepping out of the public eye. For several years, she was largely absent from the major label spotlight, choosing a quieter life during a time when the industry was undergoing major transformations. Then, 6 years later, she resurfaced with What I Deserve, an album that critics praised for its honesty and maturity. It marked a return not to radio dominance, but to artistic clarity. After marrying Bruce Robison in 1996, her career intertwined with her personal life in meaningful ways. The two artists collaborated, toured, and supported each other creatively, forming a partnership that extended far beyond music. Willis continued releasing albums into the 2010s, including well-received projects that resonated with longtime fans who appreciated her commitment to authenticity over commercial chasing. Her 2018 album, Back Being Blue, became a symbolic full-circle moment. It brought her back to the sound that first drew listeners in and reminded the country community that some artists don't vanish because they're forgotten. They simply choose to step back, live their lives, and return when they have something real to say. Kelly Willis never truly disappeared. She merely walked a different path, one where artistry mattered more than constant visibility. Number 13, Brian White, a 90s favorite who quietly slipped out of the spotlight. In the 1990s, Brian White was a rising force in country music. His early albums were packed with hits. Songs from his first two records climbed into the top 20 and helped cement his place among the decade's most promising young stars. His third album performed even better, with standout singles like Sittin' on Go, reaching number 1 and proving he had the talent to stay on top. Fans connected with his smooth vocals and heartfelt delivery, and for a while, it seemed as though Brian White was on an unstoppable trajectory. But by the late 1990s, cracks began to form beneath the surface. His fourth album failed to produce a major charting single. It was an unexpected downturn for an artist who had previously moved from success to success. The early 2000s brought more difficulties. In 2001, he released a compilation album that didn't perform as hoped, followed by another underperforming project in 2006. These disappointments marked a turning point. The drive to stay at the top, coupled with the pressure of the industry, began to weigh heavily on him. Eventually, Brian stepped back from the spotlight, taking a break to find balance and protect himself from the burnout that so often shadows fast-rising stars. Yet he didn't abandon music. In 2009, he returned with Dust Bowl Dreams, an album that showed a matured voice and a deeper sense of artistry. While the project didn't return him to the radio charts, it earned praise from fans who still remembered his earlier work. His most recent album came out in 2013, marking the most recent chapter of a career built on both triumph and introspection. Brian White's fade from mainstream recognition wasn't a fall, but a quiet exit, the kind chosen by someone who realized that personal peace sometimes outweighs industry expectations. Number 12, a Canadian star whose light dimmed slowly. Across Canada, Michelle Wright is remembered as one of the country's brightest stars. In the 1990s, she was at the peak of her fame, releasing hit after hit and becoming a beloved figure within Canadian country music. Tracks like Take It Like a Man showcased her powerful voice and captivating stage presence, making her a standout during a decade filled with fierce competition. Her 1994 Greatest Hits album was a major success, reaffirming her place as one of the leading voices in Canada's country scene. But while her fame at home remained strong, her success in the United States was more complicated. The American market is notoriously difficult to crack, and despite her undeniable talent, Michelle struggled to achieve the same breakthrough south of the border. She continued to release albums through the early 2000s, including a compilation in 2004. However, those releases didn't reignite the momentum she once enjoyed. Over time, her presence on U.S. charts faded almost completely. In Canada, she remained respected, But even there, the country landscape was shifting, bringing in new artists and new sounds that made it harder for established names to maintain their footing. In 2013, she released Strong, an album that showed she still had the vocal power and emotional depth that defined her early work. But without the widespread radio support of earlier decades, the record didn't receive the attention it deserved. Since then, Michelle has stepped further back from mainstream country visibility, appearing occasionally but no longer commanding the spotlight as she once did. Her story is a reminder of how unpredictable fame can be. In one country, she was a celebrated star. In another, she struggled to gain traction. And eventually, the quiet between albums grew longer until her presence became a memory rather than a headline. Number 11, a pure country voice, lost in a changing industry. Ashton Shepherd entered the country music scene with something rare, a voice that felt untouched by trends. Raw, emotional, and steeped in the roots of traditional country, she emerged during a time when the genre was becoming increasingly polished and pop-driven. Her authenticity made her stand out immediately. She released 2 major singles that charted well, capturing listeners who appreciated her down-to-earth storytelling and vocal grit. For a moment, it looked like Ashton might become one of the genre's next big traditionalists, a counterweight to the glossy, radio-friendly sound taking over Nashville. But the industry's shifting priorities worked against her. Traditional voices like hers struggled for airtime as labels focused on artists with crossover potential. As a result, Ashton Shepherd's music, despite its quality, received less and less mainstream support. Her second album, Where Country Grows, produced modestly successful singles but didn't create the surge she needed to stay competitive in a market that seemed determined to move away from her style. The commercial disappointment took its toll, and Ashton drifted from the center of the industry. Yet she didn't vanish completely. True to her roots, she continued releasing music independently, including singles such as Remembers Me and Oil and Water. These releases proved she hadn't lost her passion or her talent, only the machinery of major label backing. Ashton Shepherd's fade wasn't due to scandal or failure. It was simply the result of an industry that changed direction while she stayed true to the music she believed in. Her story is one of resilience, a reminder that not every great voice fits neatly into the trends of its time. Terri Clark, a career of high highs, followed by a quiet fade. Terri Clark burst onto the scene in the mid-1990s with an energy that immediately set her apart. Confident, charismatic, and unmistakably country, she didn't just sing songs, she owned them. In 1995, she released her self-titled debut album, and with it came 3 major hits that quickly put her name on the map. A year later, she followed up with a critically praised live performance hosted by CMT, and by 1998, she was already releasing a greatest hits album, an accomplishment most artists don't reach for decades. During the late 90s and early 2000s, Terri Clark was everywhere. That momentum led to Fearless, a studio album that included one of her most celebrated tracks, No Fear. The song showcased both her vocal range and her emotional depth, and it reminded the industry that she wasn't just a performer. She was an artist with something to say. She kept releasing albums throughout the 2000s, including a greatest hits package in 2004, which once again highlighted just how many successful singles she had accumulated in a relatively short period. But the industry was changing fast. Newcomers were entering, radio was shifting, and even established stars were being pushed aside as labels refocused their priorities. After her 2010 album, Terri's visibility began to dim. She still toured, still recorded, still had a dedicated fan base, but her name wasn't appearing on the charts the way it once had. Her last major studio release came in 2018. Since then, her activity has slipped into a quieter rhythm. Scattered tour dates, occasional appearances, and a presence that's still felt, just not in the same way it once dominated. Terri Clark didn't lose her talent. She simply became another artist who drifted from the mainstream as the tides of country music changed direction. Number 9. Lori White, a promising career cut. Tragically short, Larry White's story is one of breathtaking promise paired with heartbreaking tragedy. Her career began in the early 1990s, but it truly took off in 1994 when her single That's My Baby climbed the charts. That success was followed by Now I Know, which hit the top 5 and solidified her place as a rising star. Fans admired her powerful vocals, her artistic courage, and her willingness to push boundaries in both songwriting and production. In 1998, she made a bold move and left her first record label, later signing with a new one. That same year, she released Stepping Stone, her sixth studio album. While the album didn't achieve the widespread success many expected, it showcased a maturity and confidence that signaled the next phase of her artistic evolution. In 2004, Laurie released Green-Eyed Soul, an album that blended country, pop, and soul influences. It was a bold step that displayed her versatility, and while it didn't top the charts, it earned respect from critics who recognized her creative bravery. Then, in 2006, she explored an entirely new facet of her artistry by starring in the Broadway musical Ring of Fire, proving that her talent extended far beyond just one genre. Her final studio album came out in 2017, offering fans one last glimpse of her voice and vision. But just months later, devastating news emerged. Larry White had been diagnosed with advanced peritoneal cancer. She passed away in 2018, leaving behind a legacy that felt unfinished, but still deeply meaningful. Larry White didn't fade into obscurity because the world forgot her. She simply didn't have enough time to show everything she was capable of. Her story is a reminder that sometimes the spotlight dims not because an artist slips away, but because life itself intervenes too soon. Number 8, Julie Roberts, A Golden Voice. Overshadowed by personal struggles, Julie Roberts' rise in country music began in 2004 when she released her self-titled debut album. While the project didn't crack the Billboard 200's top 40, it made an immediate impact on the country charts, climbing inside the top 10 and later earning gold certification. The album's lead single, Break Down Here, became Julie's signature song, a powerful, emotional performance that introduced her to millions of listeners. Her second album, released in 2006, also charted in the top 10 on the country charts, even if it didn't match the commercial success of her debut. But Julie's journey wasn't just about the music. Behind the scenes, she was battling multiple sclerosis, a diagnosis she kept private for years. The physical and emotional toll of the disease affected her career in profound ways, even as she tried to keep moving forward. Her third studio album arrived in 2010, but it didn't make the same impact. And by then, the country music landscape had shifted dramatically. New artists were emerging, radio was changing, and Julie was fighting a battle that made the demands of touring and recording far more difficult than fans realized. In 2013, she auditioned for The Voice, hoping to reignite her career, but she didn't make it past the blind auditions, a moment that stung but didn't break her spirit. She continued releasing music independently, including an album in 2013 and a gospel-inspired project produced with Christian singer Jason Crabb. Julie Roberts didn't fade away because she failed. She faded because she was fighting a battle most people couldn't see. Her voice remains one of the most distinctive of her generation, even if the industry didn't always know what to do with it. Number 7, Lauren Alaina, a bright star who struggled to stay at the top. Lauren Alaina emerged from American Idol with momentum and a fan base ready to embrace her. Her debut album, released when she was still a teenager, made waves with songs that showcased her vocal power and heartfelt delivery. She seemed poised for a long, successful run. When her second album didn't live up to commercial expectations, many wondered what had gone wrong. The truth was simple. The industry was shifting, and labels were becoming less patient with artists who didn't deliver immediate chart-topping success. Still, Lauren refused to disappear. She kept touring, kept recording, and kept connecting with fans who saw her as a voice of honesty and vulnerability. In 2017, she released what her fans and critics consider her breakthrough, Road Less Traveled. The title track hit number 1 and validated everything she had worked toward. For a moment, it felt like Lauren Alaina had finally taken her place as one of country music's leading young voices. But consistency is the hardest part of any career. After a 3-year delay, she released her next studio album, a gap that weakened her momentum. In the years that followed, her music releases became less frequent, and her visibility slowly began to fade. By the time she released her latest album in 2020, the landscape had shifted again. Lauren Elena hasn't vanished completely. She still performs, records, and collaborates, but her presence in mainstream country has undeniably dimmed, making her one of the genre's most notable what could have been stories of the last decade. Her talent was never in question, only the industry's willingness to nurture it. Number 6, Ty Herndon, a voice overshadowed by turmoil. Ty Herndon burst onto the country music scene in the mid-1990s with an undeniable gift, a voice capable of delivering both power and vulnerability. His first album, released in 1995, was a hit, and his follow-up records throughout the decade continued to cement his reputation as one of the era's strongest male vocalists. But while his career looked bright from the outside, Herndon's personal life was unraveling. He battled drug addiction during the height of his fame, struggling privately even as his songs climbed the charts. His record label, eager to protect their investment, enrolled him in rehab, but the effort didn't hold. The addiction continued, and its consequences eventually caught up with him. In 2002, after a series of setbacks, Herndon was dropped by his label. It marked the end of his time as a chart-topping mainstream act. For many artists, this would have been the end of the story. But Ty Herndon kept going. Over the next decade, he released 5 albums, each one reflecting a man trying to rebuild himself piece by piece. He found new strength in vulnerability. In interviews, Herndon opened up about his struggles and about his sexuality, revealing that he is gay, something he had long kept hidden out of fear it would ruin his career. Instead, the opposite happened. The revelation brought him renewed support from fans who admired his honesty. Even with that support, Herndon never returned to his former chart dominance. But he carved out something arguably more meaningful, a career rooted in authenticity, resilience, and hard-won self-acceptance. Ty Herndon's fall from the mainstream wasn't caused by fading talent. It was the result of personal battles that nearly consumed him. His survival and his continued artistry are a testament to a man who refused to let his darkest moments define him. Hal Ketchum, a brilliant talent silenced by illness. Hal Ketchum wasn't just a singer. He was a storyteller with a voice that wrapped itself around your emotions. In the early 1990s, he became a force in country music, with hits like Small Town Saturday Night and Past the Point of Rescue, songs that blended lyrical poetry with a sincerity that set him apart from many of his chart peers. His early albums made him a standout figure during a decade crowded with talent. But behind the success, Hal was facing a battle few knew about. In 1998, he was diagnosed with acute transverse myelitis, a rare neurological disorder that affected his ability to perform. The illness forced him to relearn basic skills, including how to play the guitar, an unimaginable challenge for a man whose life revolved around music. Despite the physical obstacles, Hal didn't quit. He returned to the studio and continued performing, releasing albums throughout the 2000s and early 2010s. His voice, though sometimes subdued by illness, retained the emotional texture that fans loved. But as the years passed, his condition worsened, making live performances increasingly difficult. In 2019, the heartbreaking announcement came from his wife. Hal Ketchum had retired permanently due to complications from dementia. Suddenly, the quiet periods in his career made sense in a new, painful way. Just a year later, in 2020, Hal passed away at the age of 67. His fade from the public eye was not a matter of losing relevance. It was a private battle against devastating illness. Hal Ketchum's legacy remains one of quiet resilience and deep artistry, a reminder that even when the spotlight disappears, the music lives on. Number 4, Kathy Mattea, a once rising star who chose a different creative path. Kathy Mattea dominated much of the late 1980s and early 1990s. With hits like 18 Wheels and A Dozen Roses, she carved out a place as one of the most compelling voices in country music. Her warm tone, commanding presence, and thoughtful artistic choices made her one of the genre's most respected stars. But as the decade turned, Mattea began shifting creatively. Rather than lean into the emerging pop country wave that dominated the late 90s, she chose to explore roots, Americana, and Celtic influences. It was a bold move, artistically fulfilling, but commercially risky. The more she stepped away from commercial radio sounds, the less presence she had on the charts. By the early 2000s, Kathy was no longer a regular fixture on mainstream playlists. That didn't mean she stopped making impactful music. Albums like Coal in 2008 and Calling Me Home in 2012 revealed a deeper, more personal side of her artistry. These projects earned critical acclaim and introduced her to a new audience, even if they didn't produce radio hits. She has continued releasing music into the 2020s and remains active on stage, often performing in intimate venues and folk festivals rather than arenas. For Kathy Mattea, fading from mainstream visibility didn't equal fading artistically. It was a conscious choice to follow her creative instincts instead of chasing chart positions. Her story reflects the reality that some artists fade, not because they fail, but because they choose to evolve on their own terms. Number 3, Neil McCoy, a live performer, whose radio days slipped away. Neil McCoy was one of the most entertaining performers of the 1990s. Known for his high-energy stage presence and charismatic connection with crowds, he built a loyal fan base that extended far beyond radio airplay. Hits like No Doubt About It and Wink became staples of the decade, earning him widespread recognition. But as the 2000s began, country radio shifted dramatically. The rise of pop country and the increasing dominance of younger artists left less room for performers whose strengths were rooted in traditional stage performance, rather than contemporary crossover appeal. Neil's albums throughout the early 2000s didn't produce significant chart success, and by the mid-2000s, his presence on mainstream radio had largely faded. Still, McCoy never stopped performing. In fact, he leaned even harder into his strength, the live show. He built a reputation as one of the most reliable touring acts in the industry, delivering energetic performances that kept fans returning year after year. In 2017, he released a new album, Neil McCoy, demonstrating that he still had the voice and passion that defined his earlier years. But without strong radio support, the project didn't revive his mainstream visibility. Neil McCoy's fade wasn't due to lack of talent. It was the result of a shifting industry where radio trends dictated who stayed in the spotlight. Yet on stage, where trends matter far less, Neil's legacy remains strong. Number 2, John Michael Montgomery, a 90s hitmaker slowed by health battles. Few country stars of the 1990s had a run as powerful as John Michael Montgomery. With massive hits like I Swear and I Can Love You Like That, he became one of the decade's defining voices. His ballads, especially, showcased a rare emotional depth that resonated with millions. Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, Montgomery continued to release albums that performed well commercially. But behind the scenes, his personal life was growing increasingly complicated. He suffered from vocal issues, including problems with his throat that made singing difficult. These struggles had a direct impact on his ability to perform consistently and maintain his chart presence. His last major album was released in 2008. After that, his production slowed significantly, and his health challenges became more pronounced. The touring schedule that had once propelled his success became harder to maintain, and gradually, John Michael Montgomery stepped away from the level of activity that once defined his career. He still performs occasionally, reminding fans of the voice that once dominated the airwaves. But he is no longer a central figure in country music, largely due to circumstances he could not control. John Michael Montgomery faded from the spotlight not because the world stopped caring, but because life placed obstacles in front of him that few artists could overcome. Number 1, Billy Gilman, a child prodigy, who struggled to transition into adult stardom. Billy Gilman's rise was explosive. At just 11 years old, he released One Voice, a song that became an international sensation. His powerful vocals, unusual maturity, and emotional delivery made him one of the youngest stars country music had ever seen. His debut album went double platinum, an achievement even seasoned adults rarely reach. But childhood stardom comes with a challenge no child can control. The voice changes. As Billy entered adolescence, his vocal range shifted drastically, making it impossible to maintain the sound that had made him famous. The industry, unsure of how to handle his transition, moved on to the next young sensation. Through his teenage years and early adulthood, Billy struggled to regain his footing in country music. His attempts to reestablish himself as an adult artist didn't produce significant chart success, despite his undeniable talent. The audience that once adored him had aged, and the new listeners entering the market saw him not as a rising star, but as someone from a different era. Then came The Voice in 2016. Billy auditioned, stunned the judges, and made it to the finals, an impressive comeback. For a moment, it seemed like he might finally reclaim a place in mainstream music. But despite the attention, the surge didn't translate into a sustained chart presence. Billy Gilman remains an incredible vocalist, but the unique circumstances of his early fame created hurdles few could overcome. His fade wasn't due to scandal, poor performance, or lack of talent. It was biology, timing, and the challenge of rebuilding a career that began before he was even a teenager.